All right. Good morning, everyone. I am so excited to be here this morning. It's so cool to be able to look out here and see friends and family and all these people who have invested in my life over the last 21 years. Sunday school teachers, VBS leaders, you got Boys Brigade leaders, you got youth volunteers, softball teammates. I've got all these people out here who have just taken the time to invest in me. And it's just so amazing for me to be able to be up here to speak this morning. And I know at Woodbury Community Church, when we do baby dedications, we not only have the friends and family come up, but we have the congregation stand up as well. And they come and proclaim alongside them that they will come alongside the child to raise them in the faith and to come alongside them. And you all have been an example of that for me in my life. So before I even get going this morning, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for everything that you've done and everything you'll continue to do. And I am so excited to be up here and speak this morning. This is so great. So let's get started. All right. So growing up for me, one of my favorite places to be in all the world was Madeline Island, Wisconsin. Our family has a cabin up there. And one of the most beautiful places up there was Big Bay State Park. And if you're going up there and you're bringing people, you always bring them to Big Bay. And it's just this beautiful, gorgeous place. And at Big Bay, they have these paths you can walk through in this beautiful forest. And then there are these cliffs and these rock cliffs that you can climb over and some you can jump off of. And I remember the first time that we found this cliff. I'd never seen people jump off of it until I was about 14 or 15. And we were going there and hear these people hooting and hollering and then over there and talk to them, see what they're doing. And they'd say, oh yeah, we're jumping off. It's about 15 feet tall and there's like 20 feet of water, so you're good. You'll be fine if you do it. And I see it and I'm like, absolutely. And so I say I'm going to do it. And I get up there and you see there's kind of like a little landing strip and you can kind of run off and jump off the end there. And so I line up and people are starting to cheer me on. And I take those first few steps, and I get to that last step, and my legs completely lock up, and I'm not going anywhere. And you can see I'd be standing right there and kind of looking over, and I'm not moving. And for some of you who know me, I'm scared to death of heights, so the fact that I even wanted to do this was ridiculous. But I decide after the first time when people start making fun of me, and the girls who I was trying to impress who are about my age are not impressed at all, and I decide I'm going to stand there, and instead of running, I'm just going to jump off with one foot. I'm just going to push off. And standing on that edge was one of the most terrifying things in my whole life, to stand there and just to see 15 feet from me to the water. And you can see there's kind of like a protrusion where it kind of comes out, and it looks like when you're standing up there, if you don't jump right, you're going to land on those cliffs underneath you, and you could really, really hurt yourself. And I remember my dad saying, well, if you don't jump far enough, you might break your legs. And that doesn't help. So I stood there for 45 minutes that day, and stood there, and people are jumping around me, and eventually my family's like, all right, we're leaving. We're not going to stay here anymore. And I walked away that day, and I couldn't do it. And I was so afraid that something would happen. And in fear, I walked away. And I missed out on that exhilarating adrenaline rush experience of being able to jump off that cliff. And in fear, I couldn't do it. And I couldn't help but think about that this week as I was preparing for this sermon, that can be exactly what we do in our own lives with God. That when it comes to difficult decisions and tough things we're facing, and when God is calling us to things, what we tend to do is run the other way. And it's so cool that today we're in the book of Numbers, and in Numbers 13 and 14, where we're going to camp out today, we see the story of the Israelites, and they're on the brink of the promised land. And they're right there, and they have the option either to go in with faith and follow God and what He's calling them to do, or run away in fear. And in fear, they run. And today I want us to see that instead of being fearful, that we are called to be faithful to God. And instead of running from Him, that we are going to run to Him and run to everything that He has for us. And that is so much better and so much more good for us than anything that we can run away from. So will you join me in prayer? Father, we just thank you so much for us being able to come together this morning. It's a body of believers. And I just pray this morning as we talk about what it means to follow you faithfully and see the fear in our lives, but run to you when we see that, Father. I just pray that as I speak this morning, that this is not my gospel or my words, Lord, that I'm preaching, but this is yours. And so, Father, just get me out of the way so that you can speak through me here today. And I just pray that you open up the hearts and minds of this congregation, Lord, so that you can speak right to them and just be able to continue to mold them more into the image of Christ. So I just pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so let's do a quick overview this morning to catch everyone up before we get in there. So for those of you who are new or haven't been here for a few weeks, we're calling it the challenge, and we're reading through the Bible over the course of the year. And so where we are right now is we've got the Israelite people, the chosen people of God, and they were in slavery in Egypt for 400 years. And then God brought them out of that slavery and took them out of that, and then He's given them the Ten Commandments. He's given them the law that they're going to follow, God's call for their lives and the laws for them there. So they've received that law, and then God has called them and brought them right to the edge of the Promised Land. And that's where we are in the book of Numbers. God has brought them right to the Promised Land, and God then comes to Moses and tells him that He wants to have him send 12 spies into the land of Canaan so that they can go and look at it and then come back and report to them so they can be ready to go in and take that land. So Moses selects 12 people, one from each tribe, and they go in and look and survey the Promised Land, and they come back. And we're going to focus in on that report that they gave and the different perspectives that we see in that. And so that's where we're going to camp out this morning. So if you want to open your Bibles, we're going to be in Numbers 13:26. Is where we're going to start today. So we're going to read through that, 26 through 14:11. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. They reported to them and the whole assembly and showed them the fruits of the land. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. And we even saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev, and the Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly take it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We cannot attack these people. They are stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it, and all the people we saw there are of great height. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." That night, all of the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All of the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, "If only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to each other, "We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt." Then Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly gathered there. Joshua son of Nun and Caleb son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, "The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, He will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them." But the whole assembly talked about stoning them. Then the glory of the Lord appeared to the tent of the meeting to all the Israelites. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me, in spite of all the signs I have performed among them?" So this morning, I think we see two different pictures here in this story, and we see the portrait of the faithful and the portrait of the fearful, the 10 spies who in fear ran from God, and the 2 spies, Caleb and Joshua, who followed God's promises. And so we're going to start off this morning with that portrait of the fearful. And I think what we see is that, first off, this overarching theme that fear leads to unbelief. And that whenever we are fearful in things, it's rooted in that unbelief that we have. And I think we can see that these people didn't truly believe in God and what He had promised them. And what we can see is that they forgot God's goodness. In Numbers 14:2, they say, if we had only died in Egypt. Really? They have these people who have experienced God delivering them from 400 years of slavery, and yet when they come across any sort of trial or difficulty, and we see this all throughout the book of Exodus, anytime that something difficult comes, they immediately forget all of the good things that God has done in their life, and they focus immediately on the negatives there. And not only did they forget God's goodness, they ignored his greatness. In Numbers 14:3, it says, why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? They think God is bringing them to this place to die. And now these people have come from slavery, and God has shown them his greatness through the 10 plagues in Egypt. He's parted the Red Sea, and he's given them miracle after miracle, and he keeps providing for them over and over again, and he continues to show them his greatness. And then when it comes to that difficult decision, they completely ignore it. And we know that they saw it at one point, because when the Red Sea is parted, you see them praising and worshiping God. And then when it comes to them being faced with a problem, they forget his greatness. Let's look in Numbers 13:32. It says, they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great height. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. And what we see here is that in all reality, when they're talking about the Nephilim there, it's true that they were a big people, a large people, but they're really exaggerating the number that were there. It's not as if Goliath is just walking around everywhere in the Promised Land. But what we see here is that they maximized potential problems. And they take this picture and they blow it up. They say the whole land is like this. We're like grasshoppers in their eyes. And that's exactly what we do when we come and face problems in our own lives. We take the problems and we make them bigger and bigger, and we exaggerate them until that's all we can focus on. And I don't know about you, but over the last few years, I've seen a lot of my either younger cousins or family members who've been teaching their children how to ride bikes. And I've kind of been paying attention to that, and I've seen a similarity among almost every person who has been trying to learn how to ride a bike. And that is when they get on that bike, they are looking for any excuse they can to get off of it. And they'll get on the bike and they're ready to go, and then they say, oh, my shoe isn't tied tight enough, or my helmet feels a little loose, there's a dog about a mile down the road and I'm afraid of hitting it, or the sewer smells really bad and I can't ride the bike right here. And what we see is that they can even start to get going, but when they start focusing on those problems and start focusing on the dog down the road or focusing on their loose shoe, what happens? They fall down. And I think that happens exactly in our own lives. I don't think that we grow out of that. That doesn't end when we're 5 or 6. I think we continue to do that over and over again. When we face problems and face challenges in our life, we make them so big that we can't focus on the task that God has put before us, and we can't complete what God has called us to do when we focus on those problems. So they maximize the potential problems, and by doing that, they minimize powerful promises from God. In Numbers 13, we see that the spies, they come onto the land. They come to the land of Hebron. And from Hebron, it's raised up so you could see most of the promised land. So you'd be able to get a great look at what was down below and what God had promised them. And if you're following along with us in the challenge, you may think that Hebron sounds a little familiar. And it is. Back in it would have been January, we were in the book of Genesis. And in Genesis 13, God brings Abraham to the land that he's going to settle in, and surprise, surprise, that land is Hebron. And so he settles down there, and 2 chapters later, in Genesis 15, he comes and makes a promise to Abraham. And he promises him that his people will be slaves in a foreign land, sojourners there for 400 years, and then God will bring them out of that slavery and deliver them, and he'll bring them back to this place, to that land, to Hebron, where they then will be able to go into the promised land, and he will give them that land that he had promised them. And we see that all of the patriarchs of the Old Testament, you have Abraham and Jacob and Isaac and their wives, and they're all there buried in Hebron. And so we see that God has taken this place and he set it apart for his people, for it to be their land, for the place that God has given them. And so when we get to Numbers 13, you would think that the Israelite people would just be falling on their faces, worshiping God, knowing that He is on the brink of fulfilling this promise that He has given them. And 400 years of promise that He has waited, that they've been waiting on, they are here in the land of Hebron where God is going to fulfill His promise. But instead, they're looking at each other saying, "Look how big those guys are." And what we see is that they forget His greatness and His goodness. And because of this, they disobey God. And as a result, they miss out on God's blessing. Because of their sin and because of their disbelief, God comes down and tells them that none of the people who sinned and ran away in fear this day would ever enter the promised land, and they would die wandering the wilderness. And at the end of Numbers 14, after they've been told this, the Israelite people try and go in and try and do it themselves. And they go in and try and take the land on their own, and they are handily defeated. And what we see here is that when God is for us, we are unstoppable. But when God is against us, we have no hope. And friends, we do not want God against us. And so that is the portrait there of the fearful. So let's move into the picture of the faithful that we see here. We've got Joshua and Caleb, and they're sitting there as the spies are giving this bad report, and the people are now all stirred up and flustered and worried as the 10 spies are coming and telling them all of these bad things. And they get up, and in Numbers 14:7, they say that this land is an exceedingly good land. And what we see is that they believed in God's goodness. And they say this land is good. Why? Because God has made it good, and He has made it good for His people, for it to be given to them. And so they believed in His goodness, and they trusted in His greatness. We see in Numbers 14:8, it says, "If the Lord delights in us, He will bring us into this land." And what we're seeing here is that they're not saying that this is just going to be a piece of cake. They're not saying that this is going to be easy and that, those guys aren't actually as big as we said they were and there are less of them. And no, that's not what they're saying. What they're saying is that it's going to be hard and it's going to be difficult. But God is bigger, and He's bigger than all of this and all the problems that we're facing, that He can overcome all of it. We see that when others saw an obstacle, they saw an opportunity. And they saw God's promise that He had made to them. And instead of focusing on the fears and focusing on the problems, they saw God able to follow through on His promise. And we see this throughout history, where God puts His people in places where they are dependent on Him for God to come through with His goodness and His power and His glory to make His glory shine. And we see it in this place as well, that God is putting them in this situation where only He can deliver them, and only He can give them this land. And what we also see is that they were not swayed by the majority opinion around them, which is something that so easily we can do in our lives, can't we? That when we're faced in a situation where the people around us, especially people who are in authority or we may feel have power over us, when they come to make a decision, we are willing to let our own beliefs fall by the wayside as we let them make decisions, and decisions that we may even feel go against what we believe, just to go with the crowd. And I think it's very possible that one of those 10 spies who came back could have felt something that was similar to what Caleb and Joshua felt. That they may have felt that maybe we can do this. But then when the other spies come and start retreating in fear, it makes it all the more easy to compromise their beliefs. Why? Because when we are in our comfort, it makes it so much easier for us to go with what is safe. And so because of their goodness and the greatness that they saw in God, He was able to show them His blessing. And that's what we're able to see at the end of this story here, is that Joshua and Caleb were the only two people of their generation who were able to experience God's blessing and go into the promised land. And we see that they become great and prominent leaders there. And in the book of Joshua, Joshua actually goes in and drives out the people of Anak. And he goes and takes those people, the people that the Israelites were afraid to go after. with God, Joshua was able to take them and drive them out of this land. And so what we see is that when they follow God and obey him, they are able to experience his abundant blessing. And what we see is that whatever brings glory to God is good for God, and ultimately it is good for us. So what about us? Who was this story written for? What was the purpose of this? We see that in the book of Numbers, this story was written for the children and the grandchildren of these people, of these Israelite people, so that they can go and continue to see God's blessing and be able to look back on this and see how God has blessed them, and to warn them to not retreat in fear and to warn them against unbelief. And we see the story continually used throughout the Old Testament. We see in Psalms and in Proverbs and different prophets across the Old Testament referring back to what has happened at Kadesh Barnea. And we see them over and over referring to not falling in fear. And this comes up in the New Testament as well, in the book of Hebrews. In Hebrews 3 and 4, the author specifically refers to the Israelites at Kadesh Barnea and says that this is a lesson for us that we can learn from, so that we can see to not follow them and follow the fear that they had, but to follow in faith. And so what we have here is the question that's put before us: will we trust in ourselves, or will we trust in God? Will we trust in our abilities and the things of this world, or will we trust and hold on to God? What is God calling you to this morning? What is it that God has placed on your heart? Now, when I ask that question, I know immediately people there's that temptation to look to your left and look to your right and think about someone else who you say, oh, I can see how God is calling this person, or I can see how God is working in that person. And that's great, and it's good to be able to tell people that. But this morning, I'd like us just to focus on ourselves and really ask yourself, what is God calling me to do? How am I being called to act? And it's going to look different for everyone. It's not going to be the same, but God is calling each and every one of us to something. And what has God blessed you with? What has God given you? What talents or skills, and what passion has God given you? Maybe you have an extra room in your home that you may be filling up with stuff and has become a second closet for you, and maybe God's calling you to fill that room with a child who is living in poverty, living on the streets, a child in this community, a child across the world, who's never been loved and has never known love. Maybe God's calling you to adoption or foster care. And maybe you've been blessed with more than you can imagine. Maybe God has blessed you with more resources than you could possibly use. And maybe he is calling you to bless others with what you have been blessed with. Maybe you have an extra car, or you have more clothes than you know what to do with, or you have a sum of money that God is calling you to give back to his kingdom. And maybe God is calling you to spread the gospel. Maybe that's overseas, and maybe that's right here. And maybe he's calling you to do that in this community, but maybe he's calling you away from the comfort and the safety of Woodbury, and maybe he's calling you to live life on life with people in an underprivileged community, in the light of Christ to other people. Maybe he's calling you to a place like North Minneapolis. Maybe he's calling you somewhere that isn't always safe. And maybe he's calling you to get rid of something in your life. Maybe he's calling you to drop something. Maybe there's a sin or something that isn't honoring to God in your life, and he's calling you to wipe that away and wash that away. And if you're feeling that this morning, I would just pray that you just hand that over to God and to give that to him and let him fill you with his love and his grace and his mercy and his joy, and the things that when we turn away from him, the things that we can't get, that we try and fill our God-shaped hole with different things of this world, but we can't do it because God is the only thing that can fill us. This past weekend at Camp Forest Springs, we had the most incredible weekend, and we spent that time really diving into what it means to make God the center of your life, what it means to make Christ the center of your life. And then what that means is cutting away the things of this world that aren't honoring to God. And we had 35 students who made commitments for whatever it was in their life to cut away things of this world and to center their lives on Christ. What an incredible example that is for us. Let our children lead by example as they have cut things from their life. Let us do the same. Let us follow what our children, what our students are doing to cut away the things in our life so that we can be better to follow God. And if you've never truly placed your trust in God, I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt this morning that God is calling you to that. And I'm not just saying, did you say a prayer or did you sign a card once? I'm saying, have you ever truly made God the Lord of your life? And have you ever given everything over to Him and given Him all control in your life? And that can be difficult for us when we're driving through life and we're holding onto that steering wheel as tight as we can, and we don't want to let go. But God is telling us, He's whispering in your ear, He's just saying, let go and come along on the ride because I have great things planned for you. One of my favorite preachers and leaders in the faith, Dr. David Platt, said a quote once when I was listening to one of his sermons, and I immediately wrote it down in the front of my Bible, and it's always there so that when I open it, I can see it because I think it's so essential. The quote is, "We cannot use Christ's salvation if we refuse His lordship." And I think that is so central for us. We can't use Jesus like a safety net whenever we want Him. That's not biblical faith. That's not biblical salvation. We have to make Him Lord of our life, and we have to give everything over to Him, and through that, we will be able to experience His blessings, and one of those blessings is salvation, but we have to give ourselves over to that. I know for me personally, talking about fear and faith, that's really central to my story and where I am today. About a year ago today, about this time, a little over a year ago, I was a pre-law major at the University of St. Thomas, starting to think about different law schools and things that I would be doing after college, and it was at that point that I realized, holy cow, I don't want to be a lawyer, and I have no idea what I want to do with my life. And I was so freaked out and didn't know what to do, and during that time, I just remember that whisper, that calm voice of God saying, what about the ministry? What about seminary? And I immediately said, no, that's ridiculous. That's a silly idea. And like those Israelites, I ran away in fear. I ran away from God's call, and I ran as fast as I could. I looked for any other job that wasn't in the ministry. And finally, I was in such agony in my life, and such in pain and guilt and fear that I didn't know what to do. And finally, I just got on my knees, and I was praying, Lord, if this is really what you're calling me to do, I want you to make it so clear that I can't ignore it anymore. And He said, all right. And over the course of the next few weeks, person after person, people who barely even knew that I was a Christian, barely even knew of my faith, I may have spoken of it once or twice, would come up to me and say, have you ever thought of being a pastor? I feel like you'd be really good at that. And after that happens 6 or 8 times over the course of 2 weeks, you just say, that's not a coincidence anymore. And at that point, I came back to God on my knees, and I said, okay, I can't do this on my own anymore, and it's clear that you have something planned for me that I don't know where this is going to lead, but I'm tired of feeling afraid and tired of feeling uncertain, and it's yours. And almost immediately after that, I felt this calm that I have never felt in my life before. And I'm not saying that, now that I'm here, everything's great and everything's going to be good going on for the rest of my life. And there's going to be bumps, and there have been, and there will continue to be. But from someone who I feel like I've been on both sides, I was on that side of the Israelites, and I was running in fear. And I was filled with this guilt and regret and uncertainty. And that's not a way to live life. It's not enjoyable. And when I finally let God take control and take lordship over my life, and I finally let go of that steering wheel, I was filled with His love, and His grace and His joy, and I was filled with everything that He promises. And I have had this excitement for life that I haven't had before over the last few months. I have had this joy and happiness that I hadn't experienced before. And I'm happier now than I have been in my entire life, and I completely attribute that to what God is doing in my life and that I am walking along this path where He has called me to. And so I just want to ask you, where are you being called this morning? And I've been here at Woodbury Community Church for 21 years, my whole life, and I've seen a lot of different things happening here. I've seen lots of changes and lots of ways that God's been working. But over the last year and a half especially, I have seen incredible ways that God has been working in this faith family. I have seen, as we continue to send missionaries across the world to spread the gospel, we have a mission trip to Thailand coming up in the next few weeks, in the next month, where people with almost no notice came up to rise up to go serve God across the world. We have the Life Flow process and the small group ministry that has just exploded here. And I've talked to different people who you can just see the way that God is changing their hearts and making them more like Christ. And when we begin to do that, and when we begin to become more like Christ, we begin to see what God is revealing and doing in our lives and where He's leading us. And when we see that, we have the immediate reaction, I feel, to be fearful and to run. And I think what we've seen today is that as followers of Christ, we can't run, and that we are called to follow, and that even though when we run, we may run to what is safe and what is secure and what feels comfortable, when we run to God, we are able to run to His goodness and His greatness and His love and His mercy, which is so much better than any comfort that we can find here in this world. And so the question we have is, will we take that leap? And so I asked that question, what is God calling you to? And I think it would be horrible to not let you have that opportunity this morning to actually answer that question. So we're just going to take a minute as we close, and I just want it to be silent. I want you to take just a minute to pray, and to pray what God is calling you to. And maybe that's been coming up to already in the sermon today, and maybe that's been coming up for weeks and months, and maybe you know what that is. And I just want you to pray and pray to God and ask Him to reveal those things and to give us that strength to follow Him. And then I'm going to close in prayer. And if you need to spend more time in prayer, Kara and the worship team are going to come up and close us in a few more songs of worship. If you need to spend that time staying here in prayer and spending that time with God, do that. And if when we're leaving the sanctuary, you need to spend that time still staying with God, there's no one rushing you out of here. And there's people in the back just outside the sanctuary in the prayer room who would love nothing more than to pray with you about this. And then once you have that, I just ask that you take that with you this week and continue to pray over it. And then one more step, I'd like you to have that strength to tell someone about it. And tell your small group, or tell your family, or tell a friend. Tell someone to what you think God may be calling you to, so that people can begin to pray for you and can begin to work in your life, begin to help you walk alongside you to what God has called you to. So let's just take a moment, let's just take a minute to pray in silence, and then I'll close us, and then we'll close in worship. Father, I just thank you so much for each person in this room. And I just pray that this morning that for all of us here, that when we are confronted with difficulties and trials in our life, and when we are confronted with different things going on, and when we see your call, Lord, I just pray that instead of us running away in fear and running to the things of this world, Father, I pray that we run to you and run to your goodness and your greatness and your love and your mercy, and run to that comfort that only you can give, and only safety we can have is in you, Lord. And now I just pray this morning that you reveal to each and every one of us what you're calling us to and what you're leading us to. And whatever that is, Lord, I pray that we follow you in faith, Father, and that we follow your plan so we can experience your blessings, experience all the great things you have in store for our lives. So I just thank you for the incredible things that you're doing here and will continue to do here. And I just thank you for each and every person here, Father, and how you're working in their lives.